Hello, I'm Karen from theneedlefelter.com. This is FAQ number 9, and today we're diving into a question I get all the time. Should I wrap my wire armature with chenille stems, also known as pipe cleaners, before adding wool? Let's get into it. So why do people use chenille stems to wrap wire armatures? Well, the idea is that they add bulk and give the wool something to grip onto, right? Let me quickly show you what that looks like. I have a piece of 22 gauge cloth covered wire. Let's add a chenille stem to it. I'm going to wrap this with carded core wool, but comb top works just as well. In some cases, it's actually better. We'll talk about that in a future video. As you can see, the wool grabs onto the chenille stem pretty well. But before you go out and buy a mountain of pipe cleaners, let's talk about the downsides. Because honestly, I'm not a big fan. First, those sharp wire ends. You have to be so careful not to get poked while you're working with them. And you need to cover them well, especially if you are making needle felted animals to give as a gift or sell. Second, have you ever tried wrapping thin legs or fingers with wool over a brightly colored chenille stem? That fluff loves to peek through. It can be really hard to get full coverage while keeping the wrap thin. Third, chenille stems create an uneven surface. They're bumpy and lumpy, which can translate into a bumpy and lumpy felted sculpture. Fourth, that fluffy fiber can add unwanted thickness. I've seen tutorials where people recommend you trim off the fluff with scissors before you wrap the pipe cleaner around the wire. This adds even more time and mess to your project. And lastly, let's be honest, given today's prices, covering a wire armature in chenille stems isn't exactly cheap anymore. Luckily, there's a much better way, and it uses something you already have: wool. Instead of chenille stems, I like to wrap my armatures with a thin wool ribbon. It provides a smooth, even surface that blends seamlessly with the rest of your project. Let me show you how it's done. First, grab a small piece of wool. Now gently draft it out. You're just gently pulling on it. You don't want to pull it apart, just sort of stretch it out so it's even a little bit thinner. I'm using cloth covered wire, so the ribbon already has something to grab. We'll talk about wrapping bare wire in a bit. Start by anchoring your wool at the base of your wire with your fingers, and then just slowly and evenly wrap the wool around your wire. As you can see, it's creating a nice, smooth, even surface. I find working with shorter lengths of wool is easier than a long one, so don't resist tearing it off. You can always add more wool. You can tighten it a little bit with your fingers if you need to. This technique is fantastic. You can layer wool directly on top or even use it as is for tiny fingers or toes. Plus, this wrapping technique isn't just for armatures. I use it all the time to build bulk, smooth out uneven areas, or even help me attach a nice rounded belly to an animal. Okay, so what about wrapping bare wire? The wool ribbon won't grip as easily, right? Here's my secret weapon: Elmer's Glue All, or a similar water-based school glue or PVA glue. Prepare your wool ribbon. Just apply a tiny amount of glue to the wire. And then follow the same process we used to make and apply the wool ribbon. Anchor it with your fingers at the base of the wire and then just wrap. Try to keep your ribbon flat. Mine's not flat there. pull out the excess. The glue will help the wool adhere to the wire, creating a secure base. It doesn't slip around. So why is this better than Chenille Stems on bare wire? Well, Elmer's glue is inexpensive, easy to find, dries quickly, dries clear, and cleans up with soap and water. Now let's put this into practice with our lion project. Remember, you can download the free PDF pattern for this glorious gentleman on my website, theneedlefelter.com. There's a link in the pinned comment to the blog post for this video. I'm going to bring in my wool buddy and my felting needles just in case I need to tuck in any ends. We're not going to wrap the tail right now, just set the tail aside and we'll come back to that when we're adding the top coat color. We need to wrap our lion's body armature using the wool ribbon technique. If you use cloth covered wire, you don't need to add glue, but you can if you find it helps anchor the wool. You could pretty much start anywhere. I'm going to start at the hip. Just sort of start wrapping my wool around. And you can kind of anchor it around the back of the hip by going between the back legs and then just wrap up the body. Again, keeping my wool kind of flat like a ribbon. My goal is just to cover the armature with a thin layer of wool. And you can use your fingers to help hold it in place to stop it from unwrapping as you're going. When you get to a wider area, like this sort of triangle we have at the shoulders, just wrap around that. Oops, my wool was splitting a little bit there. And then come up between the front legs, and I can just wrap right up the neck, up to the snout. You don't have to worry about keeping this really thin because the lion's head is so massive. And then I'm just going to wrap back a little bit. And then if you need to, you can take your felting needle and just sort of lightly felt in that end. Just be mindful of where your wire is. It should look something like that. It's okay if it's thicker. We don't have to worry too much about the lion being super thin, as I said, because we're going to be adding a lot of wool on top. I'll pull off a little bit more, draft it out into a ribbon shape, flat shape. I'm going to start down one of the legs, so I'll anchor it at the shoulder. See how I'm slightly overlapping the wool? Wrapping around the foot can feel tricky. Just take your time. You might want to draft the wool out a little bit. So I'm just going to wrap around the paw. Just like that. And then I can turn and wrap back up. If you run out, you can add more, so don't worry if your wool isn't as long. And then I'm going to just felt that end a little bit. You can also felt the end around the paw there's that little hole in the wire. You can, if you can, just stick your needle through that to sort of secure that wool in place. And there's a leg. And there's a wrapped foot. Continue wrapping your armature. Avoid bending the wire out of shape if you can. If that happens, just adjust and align the armature with the pattern. And check that it stands straight as we did at the end of the previous video. Now you could add a little bit of wool to cover the shoulders, but it's not necessary. And here we have it, a fully wrapped lion armature ready for felting. So consider ditching the chenille stems and embrace the wool ribbon. It's a game changer, especially if you're wrapping thin features or legs. And that's it for this FAQ. I hope you found it helpful and it inspires you to felt something. And if you don't felt, make something. See you next time.